We are now joined on the line by Ross Evans, who is the Operations Director of the Hemingways Collection. Good morning, Ross.
Good morning, Eric.
Welcome to the Situation Room. In the room, we have C.T. Muga and Nduoko as well.
Good morning.
Morning. Thank you for having me.
So, Ross, we saw an announcement by the Hemingways hotels saying that you're closing 2 of your properties.
Yeah, that's right, Eric. It's really with a heavy heart that we have to make some tough decisions. But the management team, we've been working on effectively what is a survival plan for our group as we deal with this COVID-19 challenge.
Yep.
And within that, we thought it was the best move for us was to close our property in Nairobi for 2 months of April and May, and also to close in the Mara for 2 months as well. We are keeping our property in Watamu open for the time being, as long as the government allows us to continue to operate. Obviously within Ministry of Health guidance and protocols.
Mm-hmm.
And we're hoping to, look after a few resident clients over the Easter period who might need a bit of a break.
So Watamu is still operating. Why did you decide to keep that one open?
We have some existing bookings. As I said, over Easter, it's obviously very low occupancy. But as much as possible, we essentially would like to take any revenue we can get. Mm-hmm. I think, as you mentioned in your intro, we have worked with our staff over the last 10 days in terms of our survival plan. So we've not announced any redundancies, and we are keeping our staff on as much as we can.
Yep.
And this is a commitment for 3 months. And we see what happens, in the next days and weeks to come, as to whether there are signs of dealing with this crisis and any signs of what the recovery, when it comes, might look like.
Yeah.
We will then obviously adopt our strategy and adapt our strategy accordingly.
You talked about some bookings, and that's why you have not gone ahead with the closure of the last property. Are these local bookings, Ross?
Yes, they are. Obviously, with the ban on international visitors, these are all resident market bookings. We have fantastic support from the local market in Watamu since we reopened after refurbishment 2 years ago. And this resident business will certainly help us cope with the challenge of the international travel restrictions. Certainly in Watamu, I think in Nairobi, the key for us is initially, hopefully, the return of the corporate market, at least again for resident meetings. And in Olseki in the Mara, that's typically a different challenge because it's much more of an international clientele. And as Eric said again in the intro, we are moving into high season from June onwards. And we effectively forecast that the high season for 2020 is lost.
Yeah.
We may see some green shoots towards the end in September, October, depending on when and how travel restrictions can be lifted.
Yeah.
But it's really a challenge for us in the industry and as Kenya to plan for how we recover.
Right.
I think in the past, when Kenya has dealt with big challenges, maybe none like this challenge, but those we have dealt with in terms of security threats, political violence.
Yeah.
We have been recovering as an individual country, and in this time, we will be competing on a global basis on a recovery.
Speaking of recovery, right. Yesterday, we had a chat with the CS for tourism, Najib Balala, and he talked about the fact that recovery is going to mean looking to the local market for sustenance, especially for the tourism sector. Do you see this then as an opportunity to be able to then tap out the potential that the local market then has to offer in the months that will come when COVID actually is a thing of the past?
Certainly, our first point of call will be the local market, but our business model is based on high-end leisure travel, supplemented in Nairobi and Watamu with some resident business. And also some meetings and events business. So many businesses like ours will rely on the recovery of the international market, but certainly in the initial recovery, it will be hopefully resident support that we get in our properties, which will help us through the sort of low months in the short to medium term. And then it's really a challenge for Kenya to get those international visitors back. And within that, we believe there's a key aspect of any recovery strategy, which is how do we encourage international airlines to bring Kenya back as a destination as fast as possible. Every destination in the world will be trying to get those flights back to bring inbound tourism, and Kenya is no different.
What efforts
so we need to incentivize.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, one of the ideas and something that we looked at, we've sort of been reading about is, I think a few years ago when Egypt went through some security threats, their government introduced, for example, charter subsidies, which effectively guaranteed charter companies revenue to bring those charter flights back to Egypt. So Kenya, we really need to start thinking like that. Obviously, there's fairly straightforward incentives in terms of tourist visa fees, park entry fees, which we can hopefully reduce to encourage people to return to Kenya. And it's really a case of, can we get any commitments on that now? Because people are already, they're looking to travel. They want, people in lockdown in Europe and America, they're thinking, where do I go when I can get out of my isolation and quarantine? So if we can get commitments now as to what incentives are in place, I know we had the VAT reduction, which is fantastic. And I think the CS Treasury has mentioned that those incentives and concessions will last longer than the COVID-19 crisis, which again is really comforting for us as private investors. But it's really getting as much certainty as we can now so that we can plan our recovery strategy now.
Ross, the minister yesterday was talking about even the local industry looking at expanding the product offering. Safari has always been the big thing that Kenya sells. But what else is it that Kenya can package as a tourism destination?
Well, for us, I think, as I mentioned, we get fantastic support from the local resident market in Watamu. So obviously beach holidays are almost number one of global sort of popularity in terms of types of holiday vacation. And we work on how do we differentiate necessarily what a resident visitor might prefer to do on the beach rather than an international visitor, albeit I don't think they're particularly different. We had an interesting conversation with Caroline Matoko about a year ago. We were working with her on something, and she mentioned how she'd taken her daughter, a 6-year-old daughter, to Dubai to see dolphins in an aquarium because she didn't know that we had dolphins on the coast of Kenya. So it's really getting the message out as to what Kenya offers. And I think a resident visitor is not necessarily that different to an international visitor. They want good service, they want value for money, they want to feel looked after.
And they want to experience.
Absolutely, and they want to experience. And those things are fundamentals of hospitality, and they don't change depending on where the visitor is coming from.
Indeed, it's interesting that you mentioned dolphins. There are also whales coming into Kenya.
Yeah, they should be hopefully arriving in sort of July time. It's the annual migration of humpback whales up through the coast of Kenya. And hopefully we can be open and we can be entertaining and looking after some resident guests through that period for them to experience that humpback whale migration as well.
Ross, I want to ask you a general question, not specific to Hemingways. Given this great need that the country currently has for isolation and for quarantining people who may exhibit signs of being infected by the COVID virus, is it possible that the service industry that you belong to could play a part in providing assistance in just room capacity and the availability of places, given support from the Ministry of Health and so forth? Can they play a part in helping with these processes?
I think certainly there is a potential opportunity. I know a lot of hotels have already put their names forward to provide those services. Again, I think we need clarity on what that looks like. Personally, we feel that there is a risk to our brand to a certain extent of offering a quarantine facility. So whilst we want to be, very good citizens and support where we can, it's a tough decision for hoteliers to make, but it's something that we're looking at very carefully to see how we can help.
So is this a decision that would come from the association that you all belong to? Because if it did, then you'd be speaking with one voice on the particular subject, isn't it?
Well, as I said, I think the association has made available the opportunity for hotels to volunteer or nominate themselves as facilities.
Yeah.
And that's been, widely received, with many hotels putting themselves forward. To be honest, this time, with the number of infections in Kenya being quite low, the opportunity there for extra bed space required doesn't seem to be needed at this point. But if and when that changes, then I think there would be a big push at the industry level to see how we can help.
All right. But lastly, even when this coronavirus is at an end, there is an aspect of tourism that is referred to as health tourism, if I'm not wrong.
There is certainly.
And
I'm not sure Kenya necessarily has historically been a sort of player in that market.
Okay, what are our limitations? And if we wanted to play a part in it, what would we do? Specifically, what could Hemingway do to participate in this particular market?
Well, I guess, regionally, I think Kenya and Nairobi is well known to have, leading healthcare facilities. And therefore, there is an opportunity, I think, in Nairobi, particularly with hotels, to support that industry. I think it's a little bit like the question of sort of retirement business in the hospitality industry, where people need certainty on visa requirements for long stays. And that's one of the things that historically has hampered a little bit efforts to generate some interest in that part of the sector.
Indeed. Ross, let's talk about the Masai Mara and also all the other hotel properties, not just yours, that operate in the game parks and game reserves. What kind of impact are you having when you don't see hotels operating in these areas, or conservation efforts and all?
Yeah, I think this is something that we're really aware of. So our camp, Olseki, is in Naibosha Conservancy, one of the private conservancies adjacent to the National Reserve. And there is a big challenge in terms of how we support the local communities there, with no revenue coming in the camps. We have commitments on leases, and we are working very hard with that local community to negotiate and agree concessions on how we survive and ensure that those conservancies survive. I think it would be the same in terms of the national parks in Kenya. There'll be a huge drop in revenue for KWS. And how do we ensure that these fantastic wildlife areas are secured during this time of crisis, so that when we do recover, those areas are still there for resident and international visitors.
What would it take? Because one of the things that you're mentioning is the local communities depend heavily on the properties that operate there. So we need to ensure that also we are supporting those local communities. What would it take?
Well, absolutely. I think, as I said, there's been fantastic engagement already. And the local communities and the leaders in those communities are very aware of the challenge. I think we need to be very transparent as to the length of time that this might continue, and the effect on all of our revenues. So I know, for example, that at conservancies in the Masai Mara, we are sharing all of our revenue information with landowner communities, so that they can see the impact. We're not hiding anything. And as I said, we're getting fantastic support. One of the other benefits is obviously the efforts at Treasury level to encourage local banks to provide concessions to individual borrowers. And obviously many of those community landowners are impacted by that, and those concessions can really help in terms of negating a reduction in lease revenue to manage their borrowing obligations.
Ross Evans, Operations Director, Hemingways Collection, thank you very much for speaking to us this morning.
Thank you for having me on, and to you guys and all your listeners, stay safe and let's get through this together.
You
Thanks,
too.
Ross.
Together we shall overcome. Asante sana. Have a good one.
Thank you.